over to Holly Judd, who will introduce today's speaker. Holly, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second five-part DEI series. Today's webinar is entitled From Thin Words to Thick Actions. My name is Holly Judd, and I am the HR Director of APA, and I have the pleasure of welcoming our presenter today, Keith Woodward, Vice President for Facilities Operations at Quinnipiac University. Keith also serves as chair of APA's Thought Leader Symposium, and it is with his work, along with other institutional leaders, that he first brought us this webinar in 2022 and returns today to share with us new insights. We hope that you also will engage in conversations, again, by posting your questions in Q&A or by raising your hand for live engagements. Keith, the platform's yours.
Oh, thank you, Holly. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Both Billy and Holly, I appreciate all your work getting to this point. For those of you who are hearing me for the first time, this is unfortunately not my normal voice. As it's commencement season, we've had about 3 of them move out in the whole 9 yards here. So a little raspier than I would have preferred, but I can always do my best. Matthew McConaughey, all right, impersonation. So with that said, we're going to go forward today. I've got some water and throat lozenges, and today is going to be also hopefully participatory on your end as you watch this and hopefully participate on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about thought leaders, and we'll get into the agenda here in just a second. But certainly, if I'd started this presentation with this, it would be very difficult for many people in the audience to understand, because you don't understand exactly what this says, because this is Morse code, and that would be very insensitive of me to pretend to think that everybody understands Morse code. The same would also be true if I started the presentation in different languages, while not respecting and understanding that everybody may not understand this particular language. So therefore, I could also, with the thanks of discoveringegypt.com, we could go back to the days when hieroglyphics were a thing and could communicate in this way as well. All of this is to say that all of us learn differently. All of us have different situations in our own communities, at our colleges and universities, that makes us successful. But trying to reach as many people and be as inclusive as we could be is just one of the steps I hope to take today. And by kind of starting with this, it is kind of an example of how we all can be different, but can kind of all come together. So welcome to the thought leaders. And obviously there are other ways that we could have communicated. And I'm hoping that through our conversations today, again, not all one person, but hopefully conversations, we can all learn from each other. And there will be actually some information in here outside that we've got from outside of APA as well. So first of all, thanks for coming. So with that said, we could have gone Braille. We could have gone every different way, but we're going to start right now. So firstly, excuse me, the first thing I want to talk about is what is the Thought Leader Series. I want to talk about intentionality. We'll get into diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll also learn a little bit about a report from SCUP that recently came out last year that we're going to add to this conversation. And we're going to talk with about the thought leaders and questions to bring back to campus. So one of the things, I don't presume that everybody knows what APA's Thought Leader Series is, but in my view, again, I'm responsible on some levels, I guess, for the Thought Leader Series, along with Lander and a bunch of others at APA. But one of the things I enjoy about Thought Leaders is we come together to take on a topic and do a deep dive into the topic. And I'll get into that in just a second. But the monograph that we put together is probably 35 pages long, right? And so for me to sit here and talk about 35 pages worth of the monograph would be challenging and probably not that exciting, to be perfectly candid with all of you. But nonetheless, to try and hit some of the high tops of the document, and you can always go back and look at it. So what and who is a thought leader? When you Google, this is what you get, right? You got these pictures of people just looking out in the distance. And so what thought leaders is a group of individuals that get together from across higher education and sometimes outside of higher education to take on a deep dive topic. So I thought it would be important to kind of just give you a little bit of what it is so you understand the what behind what we're going to talk about today. So Jack Colby and Lander Medlin essentially developed thought leaders about 15, 16 years ago to discuss dedicated conversations about higher education. And then what we would do is we would bring in subject matter experts to assist in that process. All right. The group gets together about once a year collectively. So every year is a little bit different. There's not once, if you've participated in thought leaders, great. If you were asked back again, great. If you weren't asked, there's no, it's just trying to bring new voices to the table. And so we kind of get together annually. We usually do it in February or March for a product that will be produced. Actually, this year's product is in its rough draft status. Will probably be released in June or July later this year. But we gather for 2 days to the far left of your screen. On the bottom left, we get together for 2 days and we talk about trying to address the issues of the day. Again, last year was diversity, equity, and inclusion. As I mentioned, there are many edits and drafts, and ultimately there's a monograph that is delivered free to the APA members. So it's because of our sponsors, in this case, Siemens and Johnson Controls, that allow us to put this together for you, the member, to take advantage of and learn from and take back to your respective schools or your respective businesses on what on what the topic is. So without spending a lot of time and wanting to get into the topic, I thought it at least worth a reference point for you that, as I mentioned, the Thought Leader series has been going on for many, many years. Here are some of the last couple topics from 14, 15, and 16 and 17. I'm not going to necessarily go into all of those. But in 18, we did managing risk and in the late and how that resonates across the university as well as the facilities department. And every Thought Leader series will look at the totality of the institution and then narrow it down into facilities and capital planning, which is one of, I think, the great things that allows the reader or to take advantage of the document to drill down into the facilities component. So in 19, we did innovation in an age of disruption. Little did we know in 2019 that the disruption was really coming in 2020 with the pandemic. But we started preparing for the 24 student in 2020, and this was created before the pandemic began, is when we met. 2021, we talked about connections in space and place. And so we talked about that because we thought the pandemic had really shown a strong light on what was happening on different campuses and how people needing to connect was relevant. So your question may be, how do I get to this document? So this slide is really designed to just kind of help you get there. So if you go to the APA website and you go to the Thought Leader series, you go to resources and then the Thought Leader series, that will bring you to those slides I just showed you. Excuse me. So with that, you'll be able to download. It's all free as a member. It's free to get, and it's a great, I kind of call it our, it's our content vehicle for the organization. It's really the original content that gets produced. So I'm super proud of it. I super enjoy doing it, and I know those people who participate are also excited to do it when they're called upon. So with that said, I will say that APA has also increased its presence on diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. So also on the APA webpage, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and its statement of commitment is listed on their webpage. I will also say that the board has made a commitment as well. So there are various topics within this site that you can gain additional information on it if you're interested. And then obviously, excuse me, the APA Task Force for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion came out with its report a little less than a year ago. And this is just kind of what it looks like. So you can download this as well. Okay. So there was probably a few little directorial points for you to go to if you find this topic and you want more information. I was trying to guide you into spaces that you could look for before we get into our actual topic. So with that said, I'm going to get into that right now. As the group got together in terms of defining diversity, we didn't believe it was our responsibility to change or to adjust what diversity means. And I put those words in quotes because it on every campus, it will probably be a little bit different. It will probably be around some of the same principles, same guiding principles that we have, but it will be a little bit different. So we took the Association of American Colleges and Universities definition, and that's what we used as we go through the process. Okay, so valuing individual differences and group and social differences based on race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, and ability as well as cultural, political, religious, and other affiliations. All right. And they also define equity is about sameness, about fairness, and that ensures that every person gets what he or she needs. And then inclusion is also the definition from the AAC&U, which is here on your screen. I feel like I've read the last two screens to you, and there's probably nothing worse than having somebody read the screen. So I will just leave that for you to read. So with those three definitions defined, we started diving in a little bit to what we and facilities can do, right? And I think that's why primarily you're all primarily here today, is to talk about a little bit of facilities. And I think I said this in the beginning, but if I didn't, this is hopefully going to be a conversation. So when you raise your hand or you put a question in the chat, Ollie can see those items, and we may open up your microphone to have a conversation about it, because I think we're all better if we do it that way. So plus it'll save my voice apparently too. So, okay. So with all of those things defined, one of the bright lines that we talked about was what you see in red on this screen, which is every institution will say they value diversity, but they actually need to live it. So we took that one sentence out of there and said, okay, what does that really mean? Okay, when you actually live it, not just talk about it. And that doesn't, right? I mean, I think we all experience things in our everyday life that get said, but that aren't actually followed through on, right? And so we tried to take that sentence and apply that to almost everything that we did. So the what's the right word? The complexity of trying to put this document together and trying to attack any topic, whether it's this topic or the ones I referenced earlier, is every institution is a little bit different in size, in square footage, in the customers, the students they serve. And so everybody is along in their journey is at a different place in time, right? And so here are some of the topics that we talked about in terms of from an institutional perspective on what the institution can do and should do as part of the conversation. Now, all that said, and let me just go back. If we take this sentence that every institution will value diversity and actually live it, we have to actually live it, right? We have to actually do some of the things that are some of the underlying principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of a journey on how to get there, on how different universities get there. And I'm just going to take my university, which I'm a little more familiar with on a couple things. But before I get there were some interesting data points that were listed in the Thought Leader series that I think are relevant to the conversation on why it's so important, right? So disabled undergraduate students have a lower graduations compared to their peers without disabilities. Only 40% of the disabled students who started attending a four-year public institution in 2011 graduated with a bachelor's degree. The rate of students without disabilities was 56.7%. So let's take that just for a second, right? So there's obviously, there could be many factors, but one of them clearly is that perhaps disabled students don't feel their campus is either it's an experience they had on campus, it's a faculty member, it's their living conditions, it's their classroom, whatever, right? It's hard to pinpoint that. But obviously their experience is different because they are not reaching graduation, which is obviously the goal. Okay. So there was a woman by the name of from University of Minnesota, whose name is Krista Sora. So what she did is she used that data to try and figure out what, the why, right? So are there things that could make you feel more welcome as a person with a disability? And how they could adapt, okay? So one of the things I would encourage you to do, if you haven't done this, and many of you maybe already have, is look at your campus from the view of somebody in a wheelchair, if that's one of the disabilities, or take a disability and look at your campus from that lens. And I don't mean just, looking on a map. I mean, get out, walk it, talk it, feel it. What could we do differently? Okay. And so how could you change that on your campus to make the student feel more welcome, to give them a sense of belonging, to give them a sense of feeling that this is a spot for them? Okay. And by doing so, increase the chance that they are going to make it to graduation, or do it so they have a feeling like they have been heard and change is occurring because of their particular situation, right? And I think the more we do that, especially in the facilities field, I think the better off the institution is, right? Because you've recognized a situation, you've made some change to the situation, and therefore your customer is a active and engaged person in the community, which I think is what we're all looking for at the end of the day, right? So fixing an inequity that belongs to somebody is very positive, right? I understand, and we all understand, that inequity requires sometimes a resolve and perseverance that may have some opposition, right? There are outside factors, there's a whole bunch going on, but the end result, right? If you can get to the end result, I think that's a positive. And in this particular case, if you take the initiative, work with either your Office of Student Accessibility, or you work with whatever your agency is at your school, I think that can only help, right? And so, as we discussed it at Thought Leaders, that's kind of the goal, right? The goal is to get out there and do some of that hard work. So how can we be more intentional?
Keith,
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question that came in from Donald Turner.
Sure.
Question is, DEI seems to be more than simply leveling the playing field. It seems to be different than the affirmative action program. How would you define DEI's characteristics and motivations? And how do you measure our success in implementing a DEI program?
So from a facilities perspective, I think that's a great question. I think, so let me, I'm just gonna tell you so we work with the multiple different offices on our institution on these issues. And sometimes, I'll be perfectly honest, sometimes there are issues that I hadn't even thought of. You know, we had, I am admittedly not the expert and am learning every single day. But we've had some issues, some sensory issues with students. We've had some plus size students that require additional seating that is different from the seating that's in the classroom. We've had, I mean, everybody, you know, well, I won't say everybody, but there certainly, there are other issues. So I'm not sure that's a real good answer to your question, but I think it's a great question. And so I think that's kind of what we all strive for, is how to answer that question in the best way we can for our institution. I am by far not an expert on affirmative action in any way, shape, or form, and would struggle to even address that appropriately, I think, as it relates to that specific topic. So one of the things I think, one of the things I want to talk about is there's the new president of Colorado College, and this was again last year, when she was first named the president of the university. She's done a tremendous job, at least from externally. Again, I don't know this person from you know, anybody else, but one of the things she wanted to do was make her board look a little bit more diverse. And I think that is a tremendous way to show the institution the importance of the issue, right? And one of the things, and this is off of their website, so this isn't anything that isn't publicly available. But you can kind of see in this slide the diversity of the board on a lot of different levels, whether it's by gender or race or their relationship or the year they graduated or their geographical distribution. I mean, what a great way to show the community that she is living that through the diversity of her board. I mean, I don't know you guys, I think it's awesome. I mean, I think it's really, really cool that she has decided to put that out there to make sure people understand it. It's being very transparent in terms of what's going on. And so I just think that's worth noting. Secondly, so let me drill down into the facilities world for a second. Let me take this. So when is the last time you were at a staff meeting in facilities and you talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion? it's probably been a while, right? It's probably been a while. So what happens if you brought that up at the next staff meeting and you started to talk about that? Okay, so I'll give you a couple examples of some things that we don't do all the time, but sometimes we've done. So when the World Cup comes around in soccer, a couple of years back, to express our diversity amongst all of our folks that work in our department, if you wanted to wear your World Cup soccer shirt instead of your uniform one day to show your diversity, to show your background, to show the team that you root for, or the country that you root for, we added that to the mix. I mean, what a great way to see all the different shirts, to see some of the same people wearing the same shirt. Oh, I didn't realize, this or that, or whatever the case may be. So I think there's some small things that you can do to bring diversity out amongst your employees, right? I will say that not everybody is the size of the University of Virginia, right? So University of Virginia has their own facilities management group, has their own diversity, equity, and inclusion person in their facilities group, right? We don't have that, right? At Quinnipiac, we don't have those things. We can connect with them, but we don't have our own person within the group. So it's easier. I understand it's easier at larger schools. It may be easier, but it doesn't mean at smaller schools or schools that are not the size of the University of Virginia can do some of those things, right? You have to be creative. Soccer shirts, celebrating certain holidays or certain, I mean, holidays is right. Celebrations and certain celebrations. We do a picnic at the end. Actually, it's coming up, I think, next week, where our groups take different foods from the countries that they come from, and they are celebrated in terms of what they have made. So much so that there are now requests coming in from, where, they made XYZ, whatever it was. And now people are requesting that, Maria or Tom or whomever make those items for them to come back because they enjoyed it so much, right? And so that's a small little slice. At Quinnipiac, and I was talking about this earlier, we have a student center, which was built with a variety of wood from many different countries. And we've put these metal labels on them to show the diversity within our student center, which also these are 3 examples, but I think there's like 20 of these different styles of wood within our university student center, which I think shows the community that this is something that we take seriously, right? It's a small step, right? But it's very visual. Our admissions tours come through our student center. It's very intentional to show the diversity of the wood that's being used. Oops. And then Frederick Douglass, many of you may know, was as you see on the screen, was an activist for human rights. So that is a good size. I probably should know more than a good size, but that is probably about 13 to 14 feet tall. And it is at the entrance of our law school. The lower right picture shows it's right at the front door there. It's very intentional that we put it there. It's designed to create thought. It's something, if you have a piece of art that you can move around to kind of help the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, maybe that's something you can do. On the upper left is our Women in Black portraits of female judges in the state of Connecticut, which is where we're from, where Quinnipiac is. Again, done with intention to celebrate those women who sat on the bench. So all of that, right, are all things, and we're going to get into a couple more here in just a second. But I want to tell you about kind of my inspiration for this. So probably about 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, my son was a pretty good golfer. And so we were up in New Hampshire. So usually it's, 45 minutes of practice time and the whole 9 yards. And so it's like soccer games that my kids have. I just, I don't stick around for the practice, but I'll be there for the game. So I kind of go out and I'll look at a college or university and see what's going on. So I saw this woman, Liz Parker. I didn't know her name at the time. But I don't have any female groundskeepers. I am almost begging people to find me a female groundskeeper because we don't have any. And that's a shortcoming on our fault, on our issue, in my opinion. Like, we should have a female groundskeeper. But I can't find anybody. So I put this slide in here because everybody needs a little bit of inspiration. And Liz Parker, who again probably has no idea who I am, and I have no idea anything about her other than she's a female groundskeeper, or she was at Keene State at the time, because I went into the office and I said, how did you get her? Is there something you did to recruit her? Is there something different that you did? Because I would like to add, so instead of an all male groundskeeper group, I would like to add a female to our groundskeepers group. So it's about that intentionality. It's about that desire within your leadership to go out and try and last time. So I want to introduce Shannon to this conversation. It says my internet is unstable, so hopefully we're back. So Shannon Dowling is an architect, and she did her work. She did a planning and design of diverse, equitable, and inclusive campus environments. And so I'm just going to spend a couple moments talking about her. So she took these 3 schools that you see on your screen and tried to work it around design environments. So I'm going to leave the screen up for a second if you want to take a picture of this or a screenshot of it, or we can certainly make it available. But this is where you find her 40-page report. And in that report, and you just have to hit that download button. I'm not a member of SCUP, and it was easily downloaded. And there's some good findings in here. So I'm just going to leave it at that for the time being. But she also created a playbook, which is designed to kind of help people figure out a way to, I think she called, it's a conversation starter to get people to be more strategic and supportive about these types of issues and these values. So one of the things she did, and again, I'm not going to take the whole thing, but because we just don't have time for it. I do want to see there are some other questions, so I want to be respectful of people asking questions. But what she took is, on the left-hand side, she took the space types, and on the right side, she took the themes. And then she took those 5 space types, and what she tried to do is she tried to break them down into choice and voice, connection, and comfort. So of the 5, I just kind of picked this one to put it up on the screen, and how some of these issues are part of what we're talking about today, right? Being inclusive, being equitable, okay? Being diverse in our offerings, impacting our diverse communities that come to our campuses. So I think all those things are really important and really cool. And Shannon, as I read through this, she really breaks it down into these 5 space types and offers some suggestions, which I think is super neat in terms of how she did it. So if you have an opportunity, after you download the thought leaders from APA, of course, you can go to the SCUP website and take a look at it again. I'll put that that page back up, but it's the SCUP.org and then resource and so forth. So if there's questions later, I can put that back up. So one of my favorite part of thought leaders, after we get discussion, after we put this together, is we have questions for the campus discussion. So we usually list about 8 or 10 questions that you can then bring back to your university or college, and you can raise these questions in an environment, whether it's a staff meeting or whether it's with coworkers. But all of us are trying to ask hard questions. All right. And the first question is, how would you describe your institution's current commitment to DEI? Right. And if your answer is positive, that's great. If your answer is less than positive, well, how can we change that? Right? Like, what can we do to change that? That should be the next question, right? Which ironically is, how would you describe your institution efforts at improving the diversity of the student body? And what steps is your institution taking to close the equity gap from underserved populations? Okay. I think those are relevant questions. I think they're hard to answer. I mean, these questions every year are designed to be hard. They're not designed to give you an easy answer. They're thought-provoking in many ways, designed to make you think about it, to take you just a moment to stop and think. And that's what they're designed for. Okay. I have 6 more questions, but I see the time is about 45 minutes in, and I want this to be, I said at the beginning, I want this not to be one person talking. So Holly, are there other questions? I don't necessarily see them, so I just want to be respectful of that.
Not at this point. Everyone should remember just to post your questions or raise your hand to be able to engage in conversation. That would be awesome.
Okay. All right. If one comes in, just feel free to interrupt me. So, how would you describe your institution's efforts in improving the diversity of its staff? And what steps is the institution taking to create an inclusive workplace? So I do most of the hiring for facilities at Quinnipiac. And so this question in itself has caused me to go out to places that I normally might not have gone to, right? And the way a lot of times the way the process works is you put an ad in the newspaper or you on your website, and in come the remarks, or in come the resumes, et cetera, et cetera. I've taken the step to try and go out to the community a little bit more and say, okay, listen, I'm looking, in the example I gave earlier, I'm looking for a female groundskeeper. Does anybody know of a female groundskeeper that they have that's good, that would have interest, right? Can we be more diverse in our mechanical services area, right? Is there, are there other things that we can do? More purposeful on my part to go out. I mean, part of it, to be perfectly honest with you, a year ago, that was and still is true, but hiring today is a lot different than it was hiring a year ago. I don't know if you're all experiencing that, but I'm experiencing that on a whole new level. I mean, people applying and then not responding, people applying and not showing up for the interview, people thinking they have the qualifications, but not necessarily reading all the qualifications. So it's a whole different mindset, but that's not what we're really here to talk about. That's my little tangent. How do you use data to address diversity inclusion, right? What additional steps are needed to help you address the situation? Are you having conversations with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office? Are you having conversations with the with human resources? Are you having conversations with student accessibility? Are you having those conversations to say, okay, yes, we're being more inclusive because we're doing X, Y, or Z, right? But this is a great question to ask some of those groups that I mentioned and track some of the data that you may have or they may have to try and help you do your job a little bit better. So,
Keith, have a question.
yes, ma'am.
Brandon Rue is asking, what steps have you taken in the hiring process to foster a more diverse candidate pool?
So so it's a good question. And Brandon, if this doesn't answer your question, please raise your hand again, and I'll try and answer it a different way. So one of the things we do is every search that I do goes through a diversity check. And I'll be 100% honest, I don't do the diversity check. That is done by human resources. And if it's not diverse enough, then they come back to me and they say, okay, your pool that you have is not diverse enough. You need to go relook at the resumes and try and make the pool of candidates that you're going to interview more diverse. That has happened on I think 3 occasions that I can think of, where human resources has come back to me. I don't know how they know. They know, but I don't know how they know. And of course, I'm only looking at a resume, so I can't tell a lot of those things just from a resume. But somehow they know and they challenge me on it. So hopefully that answers your question.
We have another question, Keith, from Syed, who's asking, we know that productivity increases when we have cognitive diversity. Simple diversity of color or gender does not necessarily increase productivity, i.e. economically viable. How do we build support in a bad budget environment?
Saeed, you think I am smarter than I am, I think. That's a great question. That is a really good question. And I'm not sure I've got the answer to that question. Certainly, budget constraints are budget constraints. I think that is a question that could use some further inspection. That is a really good question. I do not have the answer for that. And I'm not embarrassed to say I don't, because I think it's such a great question.
Okay, I have another question from Jay Price. With hiring, what success have you had in demonstrating your commitment to diversity that isn't just pointing to statements or numbers? Are there good examples from you or others where you fostered a sense of belonging?
I don't know if this answers your question directly, so challenge me and come back at me if it doesn't. But one of the things that we're trying to do is our onboarding process, which is, from my perspective, is part of the hiring process. We are trying to make the onboarding process a little richer than it is. And I think it's Northwestern University out in Illinois that has a good onboarding facilities beginnings. Is it Northwestern? Yeah, I think it's Northwestern, but I might be wrong. But we're trying to build that into our sense of community as who we are, to get them to be more engaged. Does that answer? Well, I don't know if I can respond, but if that person can respond, but that's kind of, so we're looking at how we're not even looking, we're looking at the first steps in terms of hiring, but we're looking at the next steps as well, I guess is the way I would probably answer that. Okay. I see Holly's still on mute, so I'm going to go to the next question that we have. So, what standards should be revised or adopted to promote welcoming and belonging? How can facilities management better engage with members of the campus community and understand their needs? So I think I think in the monograph we talk a little bit about this in terms of how the at the departmental level. Unfortunately, I don't have that information on the top of my fingertips, but we do talk a little bit about at the department level, understanding the community and trying to translate that into facilities and trying to translate that into space and place in terms of how and when we design those spaces. So,
Okay, question for you, Keith, from Russ. From a facilities perspective, how do you become aware of physical elements that challenge diverse populations? Do you have a system to identify these things?
So not so much a system, but I do think it's connections with folks. So it's two things. One is connections that I referenced earlier, the Office of Accessibility, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I think it's conversations with our admissions team. I think it's conversations with our residential team. I think it's you stepping up, not you personally, the gentleman that asked this question, but stepping out of the office and kind of looking at space in terms of how people can use the space or access the space, or are there challenges with space? So I think it's kind of a combination of those things. I wouldn't call it a system per se. I think it's it certainly, you know what, it's a great question, could probably be more formalized. I kind of equate it to, perhaps maybe there's a committee or there's a group of individuals. I hate even using the word committee because it draws up sometimes some negative connotations in higher education, but getting a group together and having that conversation. In fact, now that you mention that, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I am getting a piece of paper and I am going to organize a group to look at that.
So there's another question. What if your pool of candidates is just not diverse?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, if it's not diverse, I'm not. If we're taking the steps to try and make it diverse, right? If we're reaching out to organizations, if we're reaching out to different and human resources has personally helped me in reaching out to some other organizations. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do, to be perfectly honest with you. That might not be the quote unquote right answer, but I visited a high school probably about 3 months ago that I've never gone to the high school level, just to talk to them about a bunch of different issues to try and attract candidates. And yeah, it's a challenge. Like I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I'm telling you it's a challenge.
Yeah, we have someone else who provided a comment around that says we're having the same issues in finding qualified diverse applicants. We're attending job fairs in the community and at local high schools to search for these applicants. We have initiated an apprenticeship program in hopes that we can hire, train, and keep more diverse workforce.
No, we've had that same conversation about apprenticeships. So in our state, Electric Boat, which builds the submarines, they are advertising as far as 90 miles away for people, for welders, for builders, et cetera, to build these submarines. I mean, we happen to be competing with a very large entity. I mean, obviously, And it's super challenging. Like I struggle. I'll be perfectly candid. I struggle with it. But
Mhm. Yeah, there's another, I guess, question of sorts. When discussing diversity in hiring, how can we emphasize that the diversity should include the high management as well, not only to have a percentage of overall hiring? I'm not sure what high management is.
my guess is that senior level management. My guess
Mhm.
is that's the cabinet or management team or leadership team, whatever you call it at every different school. Right. I mean, so to a gist of the question, right? So the slide I put up from the woman from Colorado College, right? In terms of her diversity amongst her board, right? I mean, I think that is a starting point. And I think it's okay to, if you look at your board of trustees and it doesn't appear to be diverse, I think that's a reasonable question to be asked, to say, hey, I've noticed that, whatever, whatever the situation, whatever you notice isn't diverse. I think it's okay to bring that up. Because I think
Yeah.
ultimately it starts at the leadership level, right?
Exactly. Another question: what steps do you take when you have a strong, diverse candidate, but their language barriers at the onset? Do you have tools to help with that? Or should HR play a role in supporting the new applicant, potential employee with language barriers?
Yeah, that's also a good question. That's also something that I've experienced, where here's my kind of my bright line a little bit is, so for example, when we're hiring and we think we have a good XYZ insert facilities job, if they can't communicate, I am very concerned about their safety, because they don't, let's take a custodian just for an example, or a groundskeeper or something along those lines, or a painter. If they don't know what can hurt them, I kind of take a step back and just pause and be like, okay, can we get through this language barrier in a different way than what we currently can have the capabilities to provide? And sometimes you have to make an assessment, right? And so, I mean, I kind of err on the side of safety, because I don't want anyone to get hurt, and I don't want anyone to accept a job and then something bad happens. So that's kind of my right line. Okay. Oh,
Yeah, there's another comment question. Someone else is having budgetary issues and they're struggling with, how do you get around minimum wage entry level positions when Chick-fil-A offers more money per hour?
great question. I don't know how you do that, right? I do think that you can bring that up to your human resources, and I'm sure this person already has. But if your university wants to be an employer of choice in higher education probably does not. I think you could make the argument that you need to have competitive salaries, and if people are choosing a fast food restaurant over higher education because of wage, I think that's a reasonable question to ask. And what can be done? Now, some of it's contractual, right? Like if you have a union environment, you can't obviously adjust those numbers probably on the fly like you would like to. And I think that, to be honest with you, I think part of my issue is something similar to that. Not exactly identical, but similar on some level. And so, yeah, that requires a conversation, probably with the senior facilities officer and the budget office, to say, hey, listen, we're losing people that we think would be great for our institution to Chick-fil-A. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we want to be an employer of choice, if we want to be a reason why people in the community come to us, there's another component to that conversation that needs to occur.
Yeah. We're at 156, Keith, so let's hold off on maybe a couple of questions that have come in and keep going.
Okay, so I just have, I just have a couple more. Actually, this is probably one of the last slides. And someone talked about, reference this a little bit, but what processes exist today to address equity at your institution, and how effectively does the campus culture welcome open conversations and difficult questions? And so I think the hardest, maybe not the hardest, but I think one of the most challenging thing is to ask a difficult question nicely, right? I think asking the way I just kind of tried to frame the Chick-fil-A conversation question is, you can ask your question instead of saying, hey, Chick-fil-A pays whatever $16 an hour and we pay $16 an hour, we're not competitive. I think if you frame it in what the university or college wants to be, right? These are their stated goals, and here's where we think they're coming up short, is probably a better framework for that question, right? And I think probably helps your boss or the senior facilities officer have that conversation at the management level, have that discussion at the management level. So I think all those things are, I think tone and how you ask and how you present it all are important. And if there's a process in which, as an example, our president, I think she does a great job of opening herself up every, probably once every 2 months for 10 minutes. And you can come ask her any question you want. You can come have any conversation you want with her. And she tries to schedule, it's designed to be a quick hit. What's your issue? What's your question? And we have other managers, senior managers that do that as well. So I think there are these opportunities to do those things, but come prepared, right? Come prepared with exactly what your question is. And if it's difficult, frame it in a way that does not put somebody on the defensive, but frames it in the way of, how can we be better? How can we do this better? I think would be the way to go.
Okay, let's see. We have maybe time for one quick question. Comes from Angie. When recruiting for facilities positions, where do folks see the best outcomes regarding qualified and diverse candidates?
Outcomes. I think happy, and I don't know if this answers your exact question, Angie, but I think happy employees equates to good referrals, which help in the process, right? So if you've got staff that is engaged and happy, et cetera, they will refer people who they want to experience the same thing. Now, obviously benefits and salary and all the rest of it help, but I would answer it. I think that probably answers that question.
Okay.
And I'll just conclude. Go ahead. I'll just conclude, and I'll let Holly end it the way I'm sure we're supposed to. But all these questions are hard. All these conversations are difficult. But I hope today, at least, there's been a couple things that you can take away from this. And if there are others, my email, which I didn't put on the screen, but it's very simply kw@qu.edu. Feel free to reach out. I'll try and help as best I can. I am not the expert, but I am the one that came up with this topic to try and address the issue and brought it forward to APA. And so I do think it's important. And so hopefully we address some of those issues, some of the questions today. And thank you for joining us. It's great that you guys come out and participate in this. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us on today's webinar. As Billy stated earlier, this video will be posted. It'll also be posted later on our DEI webpage. We hope that you will join us on July 19th for our next DEI series with Dana Gillen, Director of Operations and Faculty Development at Illinois College of Medicine, who will be talking to us about the value of DEI. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again.